Hi, this Beast Movies channel here. Today we will summarize a fantasy action movie. Let's start. In the future, aliens arrive on Earth and conquer most of Europe. No one can stop them, but the American army builds exoskeleton suits for soldiers to empower them to fight against this threat. The protagonist, Cage, serves as a media liaison officer and arrives by helicopter to receive his next mission from the general as they strive to unite their forces to defeat the aliens, called mimics. They insist that Cage films the war, but he refuses, citing his lack of combat experience. The general warns him that this is a direct order from higher authorities, one he cannot ignore. He tries to blackmail the general, and it seems to have worked as he walks outside the office, but the general orders to arrest him. He starts to run away, but is tasered and brought to the warship, where he wakes up on a pile of luggage, and is greeted by the sergeant and Master Sergeant Pharaoh. He tries to explain that he is not a soldier and demands to make a phone call. Pharaoh agrees to take him, but Cage realizes that it's a lie, and the Master Sergeant shows him the paperwork that claims he is a deserter and will do anything to get out of combat duty. The Master Sergeant takes him to his new team called the J Squad. When they arrived, the Master Sergeant finds them gambling and makes the squad eat up their cards. He tells the squad that Cage is a deserter and will likely run away. He makes the squad focus on him and be responsible for all that he does. At the dismay of everyone, Cage puts on the exosuit with his teammates, but has no idea how to operate it. He sees that his teammates are crazy, but he only cares about the situation he is in. Cage, feeling uneasy, tries to back out, fearing his inexperience might cause harm. But his teammate reassures him about the safety measures. As they board the transport planes, Cage attempts to flee again. On the airplane, they are about to go to the war zone, and Cage tries to turn off the safety on the guns, but fails to do it. The floor opens, and they prepare to drop off, and the sergeant is talking to them, but before he finishes, they are hit by enemy fire, and everyone begins dropping off chaotically and dying at the same time. Cage hesitates, but he has no choice but to press the release just before the plane blows up. Upon landing, Cage faces chaos on the beach. A plane crashes onto one of his teammates, sending Cage flying. He gets up and attempts to activate his weapons, but struggles with the unfamiliar language. He sees another plane falling towards him and ducks right on time, which saved his life, but killed everyone else. He looks up and sees a woman fighting the mimics with a sword. She gets knocked back, but manages to kill the enemy. She walks towards Cage but gets shot and killed right in front of him. In fear, Cage starts running in the opposite direction, but is stopped by the Master Sergeant. Their team regroups. They understand their enemy was known, and they will be coming. They barricade themselves in the ditch and wait for the enemies to come. Cage is still struggling to get his safety off, but all just care about themselves. He looks on the ground and sees something moving. The mimics have already arrived at their location. The mimic was about to completely destroy their whole squad, but Cage finally manages to get his weapons working and shoots at the mimic that destroyed his team. He manages to kill it. Another one shows up, but that looks different from the rest. He tries to shoot it, but out of ammo he grabs the bomb beside him while the mimic come on him, and the charges. He blows the alien's head off, but the blood spills on Cage and melts his face. He screams in agony, but wakes up at the same point where he had come to the base. He sees the bus drive by and remembers the woman painted on the bus as the same person he saw on the battlefield. He was greeted in the same manner as before and led to his squad. Events unfolded identically, but with the memory of the previous day, he could predict some moments. On the battlefield, he met the girl again, and this time, he saved her from being killed. However, Cage ends up wounded by the gunfire, and instead of saving him, the woman takes his battery, and Cage is killed by the mimic. Once again, he awakens at the same time, but this time he attempts to persuade the sergeant by revealing personal details that he shouldn't have known. Despite his efforts, the sergeant remains unconvinced, and he is still taken to the J Squad, but they think he's crazy and duct tape his mouth. He gets on the beach and tries to save his teammates, but gets crushed by the falling plane. He tries again and again, but he still dies. After that, he makes it to the woman and saves her from the mimics. After she realizes Cage can predict the future, she drops her sword and tells him to find her when he wakes up and tell her about what happened. The explosion kills both of them. He wakes up and goes back to his squad. He helps them discover the game and gets punished by the sergeant. He continues training with them and attempts to roll under the army truck and escape from the soldiers, but he isn't successful at first eventually. He succeeds in avoiding detection from the sergeant. He sees that the woman is the top-ranking soldier in all the army, and that make him know her place. Cage finds her training in a big room and approaches her to tell her what happened. Her name is Vorosky. She immediately understands the situation. She explains to Cage that the same thing happened to her, but she lost her powers. She tells him that he gained the power to reset time from an alpha, the blue mimic that he killed by absorbing its blood. He acquired its power. Upon reaching the weapons repair department, they meet Dr. Carter, a physicist and biologist specializing in mimic biology. He is the only one with extensive knowledge about the mimics and is the sole believer of Vertovsky's story. He explains that mimics are like nervous systems controlled by their mother, known as the Omega. The Omega assigns an alpha the power to reset time every time one of them dies, allowing them to always know the future and ensuring they can never lose the war, even if humans win against them. This is how they knew humans would come to the beach when the Omega feels it's losing power. It tries to find the responsible human, and that person will start having visions about the location of the Omega. Vertovsky had this, but she never made it there before she lost her blood. Since Cage hasn't had any visions, they have time to prepare him. His training goes pretty bad in the beginning. Cage tries to fight the drones, but is knocked away and breaks his back. Vertovsky tells him that there is only one rule: never lose his blood. He must make sure he dies before any blood transfusion can happen, or he will lose his power to reset time. She starts to train him and kills him every time he gets injured from his training. Eventually, Cage has visions of the Omega. He describes this location to Dr. Carter. They plan their escape off the beach, trying numerous times to carefully plan on escaping, but each time Vertovsky would end up dead. Cage becomes upset and goes to London to have a drink in the bar. He learns that after losing on the beach, the mimics eventually take over London as well. Cage goes back to training. After many rounds of death, Dr. Carter figures out the location of the Omega. Despite their efforts, Cage says that their attempts are futile. They cannot escape the beach no matter how hard they try. Before we continue, if you like the video, don't forget to hit the like. In one iteration, he accompanies Vertovsky onto the beach and single-handedly decimates the mimics, leaving his squad. They go to the trailer park beside the beach and plan how they will escape. They find a caravan but didn't care to detach its trailer. They both run up in the vehicle away from the incoming mimics just when they go away from the war arena. A mimic emerges from within the trailer. Cage swiftly deals with it, shedding some unnecessary baggage in the process. Cage talks with Vertovsky about her personal life, which surprises her. It's obvious that this is not their first war. The car runs out of gas and arrives at a farmhouse. Cage's exoskeleton runs out of battery too and leaves it behind. They find a helicopter behind the barn, and Vertovsky wants Cage to fly it, but he says he's afraid of crashing. Vertovsky grunts while untangling the helicopter, and Cage uncovers a sizable wound she had concealed. Despite his efforts to cover her up, she remains insistent on finding the helicopter keys. Cage gives her some coffee and adds 3 sugars. Vertovsky is surprised that Cage knows what she likes, but she never told him about that, which means that they have been here more than once. She urges Cage to tell her the truth, and he reveals that he always had the keys but doesn't want to start the flight, because every time he does, Vertovsky dies. She grabs the key and starts the helicopter, which exposes their location and triggers an attack by the mimics. In the end, the aircraft crashes. Cage arrives to find her breathing her last breaths in his arms, surrounded by the neighboring mimics, who ultimately kill Cage as well. This time he wakes up and finds Vertovsky, but he refuses to tell her what happened to keep her safe. He prepares additional ammunition and batteries, venturing alone to the farmhouse, flying the helicopter himself. He reaches the supposed location of the Omega. Exploring deep into the facility, he discovers the Omega's absence, only to be ambushed by mimics upon sight. Cage notices that the mimics are not killing him, but rather let him bleeding to make him lose the power to reset the time. He realizes that it was a trap. Quickly, he drowns himself to reset the time. He returns and informs Carter and Vertovsky that the visions were a trap. The only way to locate the Omega is by utilizing the device Carter constructed, which amplifies the signal. However, it was seized by the general. They managed to reach the general's location and clandestinely infiltrate the building. The general is taken aback to see Cage and his top-ranking soldier together. On the other side, Cage tries to demonstrate that he knows the future and explains how they can never win the battle on the beach, and the only way to win is by using the device to take out the Omega. But the general doesn't believe them, no matter how many times they have tried. After some time, they succeed in convincing him, and the general takes out the transponder and surprisingly gives it to Cage. They walk out of the building, but they find soldiers attacking them again. They find a car and try to escape from the soldiers, and Cage takes this opportunity to use the transponder. He connects with the Omega and finds it in Paris. Before they can escape, some soldiers with exosuits knock them out and take them to the hospital. When Cage wakes up, the nurse gives him a different blood. Vertovsky tries to kill Cage to reset the time, but he tells her that he no longer has the ability and shows her the blood bag. After escaping the hospital, they meet the J Squad, and he tries to persuade them to join their mission, especially with Vertovsky by their side. They steal a military aircraft and set a course to Paris. But the Omega knows they will come, and before they reach the building, they get attacked by hundreds of mimics. The plane crashes, killing most of the team. They regroup and are very low on ammo and weapons. It seems like their chances of making it to the Omega are very low. Cage comes up with the idea to use the crashed aircraft and its secondary motors to reach the building. Two men stay behind to hold the enemies back. Reassembling, they find themselves lacking in ammunition and weaponry, making their odds of reaching the Omega appear bleak. Cage proposes a plan to use the crashed aircraft's secondary motors to reach the building. Two men stay behind to fend off the enemies while the rest pilot the aircraft. The two men left behind die when they try to stop the mimics, leaving only Vertovsky and Cage alive. Despite their efforts, they crash into the building and runs to the Omega location while the Alpha follow going after them. They make it to the parking garage, right on top of the Omega, which is stay underwater. However, they cannot going for it because the Alpha in front of them, Vertovsky sacrifices herself to distract the Alpha while Cage can advance to the Omega. But Cage disagrees with that she has to do in order to end the war. She wishes that she could have met Cage in better circumstances, and she, running off the Alpha, chases her away and kills her quickly. Cage takes this opportunity to jump into the water. He swims towards the Omega as the Alpha. Chases him close behind and stabbed him, but he still smiles because he already get off the pins of the grenades. It full inside the Omega and explodes it all. The mimics die and turn to statues, but the Omega's blood passes to Cage, turning his eyes black. He wakes up again, this time in the helicopter on his way to meet the general. He looks to the news and sees that the war has ended. A massive explosion had occurred earlier that morning, wiping out all the mimics. He goes to see his team and found them all alive, and go to Vertovsky and sees her in the same place. He walks to her, but he didn't talk to her, just leave with a smile on his face. If you like the video, don't forget to hit the like.